covering everything that you need to know in talent experience.
People applying for new positions is like the cherry on top.
With the technology to attract talent.
Recruiters always know their best talent.
The AI just wants to use that information.
Inclusion efforts across the organization.
Tell me what it's like to work through associate story.
Interviews with leaders in the industry. Talk about what's new in HR tech. What are the hot topics? We're here every week, folks. Weekly look at the latest and greatest topics in HR. Hey, happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to Talent Experience Live. This is, as I like to say, the greatest show on the internet. I know that's a bold statement, but I love bold statements. This is the place to be every single week. If you are a recruiter, a sourcer, a talent marketer, a talent manager, if you're in talent, we are here for it, and we hope that you're here for it too. I'm your host, Tom Tate. I'm on the marketing team here at Phenom. And if you're just joining us, we go live every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Be sure to like, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit that little notification bell. We want to make sure that you get notified so that you never miss a beat. We wouldn't do it if it weren't for you joining and contributing and being a part of the crowd. We really love it. So Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the team here at Phenom. And if you're not familiar with Phenom, our purpose is to help 1 billion people find the right job. That is not a misspoken word. That is not a typo. It is not a million. It is a true billion, and we are well on our way, and we can't do it without our amazing community, of which you are a part of it. So thank you so much. Our talent experience platform at Phenom, it helps candidates find the right fit faster. It helps employees evolve in their current role and beyond. It helps recruiters achieve some of that next level productivity and efficiency, and it helps managers build better teams with data, analytics, and automation. All of this is powered by super slick artificial intelligence and machine learning and incredibly built experiences, again, for your candidates, your recruiters, your employees, and your managers. If any of this is interesting to you at all and you want to learn more, head on over to phenom.com. We'd love to have a conversation with you. We'd love to help you explore what we can offer and some of the challenges that we can solve. But enough about the product, enough about the platform. We are very excited today. We have an awesome topic. And as you can see, if you are a longtime viewer, if you were here with us last week, I was in the office. A very foreign concept, right? I was in the office face to face with our new CHRO, Jess Elmquist. And it felt so amazing to kind of be back in there and having these authentic face-to-face conversations. We had a really awesome conversation, by the way. So be sure to check that out over at phenom.com. We'll have a blog post recapping everything. YouTube, LinkedIn, we have the replays as well. We covered a ton of great topics. And Jess was just an amazing storyteller, just a great speaker, really important insights that he had to share. And I think everyone should really get this episode over to your own CHRO. That's my call to action, right? If you had an opportunity to see this episode and connect with us and connect with me and Jess, and if it resonated with you, and we had quite a few people reach out and say that episode resonated, shoot over that link to your CHRO. Really awesome opportunity to invite your CHRO to join the conversation, right? Join the conversation. We'd love to connect with you. So I want to give some quick shout outs before we get started. Shout out to our video producer, Justin Devitt. He is behind the scenes as always, pulling the strings, hitting the knobs, pulling the levers. And I also want to give a shout out to our executive producer. So Patri Chupa, she really plans everything. She's behind the scenes doing so much. Patri is doing our program content. She's connecting with our guests. She is helping to support the chat here in LinkedIn. She's here. Give her a shout out. If you have a topic idea or guest ideas, let us know. We want to connect with you as well. And of course, we always want to hear from you, who you are, where you are tuning in from. Talent Experience Live is an awesome opportunity to connect with each other, right? So let us know where you're tuning in from and connect, network. This is a place for you to find your people, find other people who are in your area of focus. Maybe you need something, right? And you'll find the perfect person to help you connect with something you're looking for. We've even seen anecdotally, some mentorships kind of budding, from the Talent Experience chats, which has been pretty cool. As always, we like to kick things off with an icebreaker. So I want to hear you chime in on the chat as well. Today's episode, we are talking all about learning. And I want to know, we've done this before, I want to know what you've been learning. So share in the comments any recent book, podcast, video, course, anything that you've stumbled upon that has helped you level up in some way. So let us know if there's anything that you've stumbled upon recently that has helped you level up. It could be personal, it could be professional. And if you can't think of anything new, just give a shout out to your most favorite kind of influential book, something that has really changed the way that you think or the way that you've done something or something that has taught you something. I will be happy to go first. So I have been rereading a book by John Kabat-Zinn, who has been famous for kind of bringing mindfulness, kind of out of the spiritual realm and into more of the scientific backed secular realm. And he has a ton of great books, but one of them is called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And it is mindfulness meditation in everyday life. We are dealing with a lot of noise. We are dealing with things moving in rapid speeds. So sometimes it's nice to slow down. And if you're kind of a fidgety person like me, it's hard to do. And this book has really transformed the way I've been able to slow down. Amy is joining in the chat saying Onboarding Matters by Donna Weber. Onboarding does indeed matter. I'm not familiar with the book, but it sounds like a good one. So love to hear it. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. So be sure to chime in the chat. Let us know. Let us know what you've been digging into lately. But without further ado, we got to get into today's episode because we have a lot of ground we want to cover. And it's an awesome one. And there's a little bit of background on how we stumbled upon today's episode. So we will jump into it. Yeah, we got some great comments coming in. So Patry started taking horseback riding lessons last year. Much harder, but loving every minute. Love that. New experiences. Awesome. Now's the time. Sarah is chiming in saying Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, by David Sinclair. That sounds like a fascinating read as well, too. So maybe one day we have to start a TXL book club, right? We have to start a little book club so we can share and kind of dig deeper into some of these things. But without further ado, let's welcome today's guests. We have two awesome guests today. We have Christine Kensey, Senior Director of Global Organizational Effectiveness here at Phenom, and we have Ljuba Bogdanovich, who is Senior Director of Talent Acquisition. So let's bring them on. Christine and Ljuba, welcome. How are you guys?
Good. Hey, Tom, how are you? Hey, Christine.
I am so happy to see your faces. Thank you for joining us. We've had some fun stories and some fun banter before we hit go live. So this is going to be a great one. This is going to be a fun one. Before we really dive into kind of the premise for today's episode, Christine, you are indeed a friend of the show. You've been on quite a few times now. And of course, you've been on other Phenom webinars and different types of things that have been public facing. So some of our audience might be familiar with you, but for those who are not, why don't you just share kind of who you are and what you do at Phenom?
Yeah, so Christine, I head up our organizational effectiveness, which really is all about helping people be successful, whether it's learning and development or org design and structure, change management, all those things. Been with Phenom for just over 4 years now, which is really exciting to have been here to watch it grow and evolve. But I started my career as a third grade teacher many moons ago. So I always joke that everything I've learned in my career, I learned teaching 8-year-olds. And I have just a real passion for everything learning and unlearning as the topic for this week goes. So excited to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about unlearning today, which is really exciting. When you're in third grade, you don't have to do that much unlearning because there's not that much that you need to unlearn, right? But of course, as we age and as we, pile on all these different things that impact how we think, sometimes we have to engage in this little practice of unlearning, which we will dive into. Ljuba, this is your first time here on TXL, not your first time doing anything Phenom related. You were a part of our IMHR conference, virtual conference last year, which was awesome. You and Sebastian did a really cool presentation on video, which was really awesome. Ljuba, you will be live in studio next week. So, we'll tease that out throughout the episode, but you're coming down to Ambler, Pennsylvania. So we will be face-to-face on next week's episode. But before we dive into today's topic, why don't you share who you are and what you do at Phenom?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. And yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation today and the conversation next week as well too. It's really surreal to be coming back down to Ambler and being able to be in person for sure. I am actually I'm in my third year here at Phenom. I joined just over the 3 years ago or 2 years ago with our international customer success team after a long career in talent acquisition and then had the opportunity to come back into a role that I'm quite familiar with and quite comfortable in, and that is to lead our talent acquisition team here in North America. And so I'm quite excited about the topic today. I'm a perpetual lifelong learner, or unlearner, if you will, and so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's great. And when I reached out to Ljuba, because we had initially planned on doing a face-to-face episode next week, and then I reached out to him on Slack, which is our communication channel. And I said, "Hey, Ljuba, do you want to come on this week?" And Ljuba was like disappointed. He was like, "Well, I was really hoping, we do a face-to-face." And I'd be like, "No, Ljuba, you're not off the hook. I want you on this week, and I want you on next week. So we're going to be doing a double header of Ljuba. So thank you again for kind of last minute kind of jumping on, and we will explain. Christine and I will explain why you are the perfect, I don't want to say third wheel, but third guest, right, for this third guest host for this topic. So again, we've teased it. We're going to talk about unlearning today. And last month at Phenom, we celebrated Employee Appreciation Week, which was really awesome. Our kind of culture HR team did such an amazing job planning kind of a whole slew of different activities and different things that happened throughout the week. One of the things that kicked off the week was a lunch and learn session with Christine on this topic of unlearning. And I had the benefit of watching it. And as I was watching it, I thought the content was really applicable, or could be really applicable, to the TXL audience, right? To talent acquisition practitioners who have encountered so many changes, right? And so many challenges over the past 24 months, we'll say. And all those changes and challenges have really required us to step back and recalibrate how we think, how we do things. And that can be really challenging if you don't have the right mindset or the right frameworks or the right principles to help navigate that. Or if you don't have the right leadership too, it can be really difficult to kind of navigate that. So I'm not in talent acquisition. Christine is not in talent acquisition, although both of us are kind of very familiar with the practice, right? And we're very familiar with TA as a discipline. We are not practitioners. So that is why we brought on Ljuba, right? Because Ljuba will keep us in check, right? Ljuba is going to really help kind of bring in from his experience in TA and from his experience as a leader in TA today. He will be able to bring that into the conversation. So this topic, obviously, super exciting for me. I'm also a lifelong learner / unlearner as well. So I'm very engaged in this. One of the things I want to do is kind of level set Christine. So when we think about these two ideas, these two concepts of learning versus unlearning, what are some of the ways that you would start to define the traditional sense, right? When you talk about learning, how do you define that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I've spent a lot of my career as a trainer in a lot of different capacities. And I've entertained people when I say, I really don't like the word training, because people think that training is learning, and they're very different. Learning is such a complex thing. We do it all the time as humans. Every minute of our day, we're taking in information, we're reacting to these experiences, we're processing it, and then we're changing how we think, how we view the world, what we believe, how we engage, what our behaviors are. So learning is just that, right? It's taking in, it's processing new understandings, new knowledge, new behaviors, new skills, values. And it's how you respond to that, and then how you change how you see the world and how you act moving forward. That's really how I would describe learning. But unlearning is something that's new for a lot of people. And there's this great sort of narrative story of a man who goes to see a monk, and he wants to learn, all this stuff from this wise man. And he starts pouring water into a glass, and the water fills up, and the glass is overflowing, and the man's yelling, "Stop, stop, it's full." And the premise that the monk sort of puts out there is, well, yes, right, you can't put more in until you take some out, right? So this idea of unlearning is that as we learn, these things that we have inside, these things that we believe we know, they're no longer relevant sometimes, or the world has changed, or we have changed. And there's this important process of actively reflecting on what we know and how we know it and why we believe it, and reassessing what is serving us well and what's not serving us well. And it's not as simple as forgetting, because I'm really good at that. I mean, I forget things constantly.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much effort for me to forget things. But it is really an intentional process to unlearn, because it's where you start to challenge your bias. It's where you start to challenge the assumptions that underlie the things that you've learned and the contexts in which you've learned them, and ask yourself if those things still hold true and if this knowledge is still valuable to you.
Yeah. Cleaning out the closet, right?
Mhm.
Like sometimes you have to intentionally do it. It's like you can keep putting stuff in, your wardrobe grows, but sometimes you have to go in and you have to take inventory and start to question, did I really wear that 4 years ago? So we have some really good visuals, that kind of walk through some of the concepts. So, traditionally, and again, like traditionally, we don't do this on Talent Experience Live, but as I mentioned, I was really inspired by your training. So we wanted to pull in some of those visuals. So I'm going to bring this on here. And there are these three kind of concepts, that you shared: challenge your thinking, question unconventionality, and chase the unfamiliar. So we'll walk through these, but we're going to have some really interesting, lively commentary that's going to bring in the recruiter's perspective, the sourcer's perspective, the talent acquisition leader's perspective as we talk about these. So to kind of kick things off, I really love this quote. Christine, do you want to share this quote and kind of what inspired you to incorporate this into your session?
I really enjoy hearing this quote when I do my Peloton rides, because yes, I love Peloton. I'm part of that club.
Yes. Yep.
You hear it all the time in all of the recorded, exercise programs that are out there. But when I was in college, there was this phrase of comfortably uncomfortable, right? That's really where you learn, is in that space. And, to truly learn, we have to step into those spaces where we're being challenged. And that's ultimately how we change. We don't change when we stay the same. So.
Yeah. So one of the things we have to do is challenge our thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple concepts here, dominant thinking being the first one. So why don't you walk us through how you think about dominant thinking, versus the alternative, which you'll share with us.
Yeah. When it comes to learning, right, our brains are constantly designed to optimize, right? So we don't even hear all of the things that we hear all day long, right? We don't actually recall and remember everything. And we like to create shortcuts, we as humans, just our brains. That's just how we remain efficient. And dominant thinking is one of those shortcuts, right? It's predictable, it's conventional, it's linear, it's based off of our past experiences. You see a tic-tac-toe board, you see, the 9 boxes, and your brain immediately knows this is the game of tic-tac-toe. I've got X's, I've got O's, I know how to play it. There's only one way to win. You get 3 in a row. That's the way my brain works. And we take that into almost everything that we do, right? Whether it's learning to drive or ride a bike or other things that just become routine. Dominant thinking is when we go down those really easy pathways. But when you think about learning to unlearn, you start to question, what if it was different, right? What if there were no rules in this game? What if the objective was different when you started playing? Why are we using X's and O's, or 9 boxes, or getting 3 in a row? These types of questions are challenging the premise and the assumptions of what's in front of us. And it's sort of that same concept of think outside the box, right? But when you really unlearn, sometimes you can even throw the box away, just pretend it wasn't there to begin with, which I prefer to do. And when you do think that way, when we start to engage our brains differently, we move from dominant thinking to lateral thinking. And lateral thinking gives us opportunities that are outside of the realm of what we're familiar with. They can be unexpected. This is where innovative thinking comes into play. This is how entrepreneurs start businesses and devise concepts that the world has never considered, that are novel and unfamiliar to us. And the game has infinite possibilities when you start to think in a different way.
Yeah, I love this image, because it really does it. You mentioned, you were a 3rd grade teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have my oldest is in 2nd grade, and I have 2 younger ones below that. And when I play games with them, they always love to make up new rules, right? So like when we're playing traditional board games, if there's a rule that they don't like, they'll just be like, no, we're not playing that way. Like we're going to play this way. And then their brains are not wired to follow the rules as outlined. Their brains are wired to do things in a way that they feel is imaginative and different and engaging. And the outcome of that is always pretty awesome. It's like, as a parent, it's kind of fun to watch sometimes.
Yeah.
A little frustrating when you're trying to win the game yourself, but it's fun to watch, right? Because they're always changing the rules.
I love this story though, because the reality is that we learn. What you're describing is how we learn to follow the rules, right?
Right.
As kids, we make up new rules, and then someone says, no, that's not the rules. And whether we know it or not, we're learning these habits, these behaviors that in some ways can even restrict us, right? It kind of diminishes that creative thinking. And so it can be frustrating because you know how to win the game. But if you step back for a minute, maybe it's not about winning the game. Maybe the premise of the entire experience changes when you start to change the rules.
Yeah.
And that's what's so beautiful about young learners, that they really don't have these societal lessons that they've learned over and over and over again. So
yeah, they don't have to pull the blankets off, because they didn't pile them on yet. Patrizia, talks about when she started at Phenom, JD on our team reminded us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right. And I think, like, again, writing it on a Post-it note, keeping it, front and center. These are important things, important reminders. It's not always necessary to live in that rigid zone of just do things the way you've always done it. Ljuba, are you a rule follower?
So no, I would say that I'm not. I try to not that I try to break the rules, but I try to figure out ways to get around them where I need to, in order to make just not my life easier, but the lives around of those around me easier as well too. I love the story of your child, Tom, in grade 2, I think you said. I've got an 8-year-old in grade 2 as well too, and the rules that he comes up with that allow him to perpetually beat his 15-year-old brother and sister in the games that they play are just amazing. And it's incredible to watch the older kids with him, because they get very frustrated by it, because they've learned what their barriers are. They've learned what sort of the roadblocks are along the way, because that's what they've been socialized with at school, right? And within the home. And so, and it's fascinating to watch how much more creative he is and how much more accepting is of divergent thought than they potentially are, just because of how they're being pushed in this particular direction. But me, no, I'm not. If I can, from a recruiting perspective, if we want to look at it in that vein, if I can get around some of the rules, if I can find candidates, not using conventional tools or through conventional means, then all the power to me and the team. So
yeah, for sure. And we'll get into some of that too. One of the things that we absolutely have to do is begin to question, the conventional ways of thinking. So here's another great, quote: "Our learning is capped to the extent of our questions." Right. And Christine, you just mentioned it too. Like, you're playing a game and you're following the rules to get to the end of the game, to win the game. And then sometimes you have to step back and question, well, like, what does it even mean to win the game? And is that really the reason for playing in the first place? So you have another great kind of visual here, this roller coaster. So why don't you walk us through this framework for questioning unconventionality?
Yeah, so this actually comes from just learning theory and my background as an educator. It's this concept of what's called triple loop learning. And I like to break it down to, it's funny, we were talking about following rules in a game, because I break it down to the way we kind of approach rules, right? So we're so used to reflecting in the world on what we're learning and how we're behaving in sort of a simple way of, okay, am I following the rules? Am I doing this thing right based on what society has taught me? And that might be, am I making the right decisions about, education, or am I making the right decisions about how I find candidates based on the processes that my company has outlined? I'm always looking to say, am I doing this the thing the right way based on someone else's definition? But we can really start to think differently and expand our possibilities when we move into what's considered double loop learning, where we start to challenge the assumptions that underlie the actions we take that get us to the results. And that's where we question the rules. So we say, am I doing the right thing, right? Is there a reason why I'm doing this, and what is that reason? What led me to believe that this is the right process? So Ljuba, I loved your comment that if I can find a candidate outside of the standard means, why not? Like, more power to me, right? If that's the way to do it, then why not? The most impressive way for us to learn, though, is the third loop, right? Triple loop learning, which is sort of questioning the context and all of it, right? Everything, the foundation, the premise behind it. That's where you can change the rules. It's how do you know you're doing what's right, right? Who's defining what's right? What is the context under which that right way to do it was even created? So we have this standard operating procedure for how I'm supposed to do this thing, but what if the context of the working world has changed, or the context of technology has changed? And is this still serving us well? And should we think beyond the scope of that? And you can apply this to your personal life, to your work life, to learning in general from an educational perspective. But it's really moving one layer back each time, looping through all of what we're thinking and processing in order to really understand the decisions we're making.
And I think something we've seen, obviously we've seen it over the past 2 years, is contextually, so many things have changed, right? When we think about context changing, in some areas, the context of a thing might change like once a decade, or once every like 25 years, something will come along and change the context of something, like agriculture, but then all of a sudden, mostly driven by the pandemic and a lot of changes to how we work and where we work and why we work. The context of so many things have changed all at once, right? So if there's ever been an opportunity for triple loop learning, like, it feels like now is the time, right, to engage in this kind of framework, this practice. So what we want to do is we want to spend some time talking through a couple different scenarios in talent acquisition where like we can engage or start to think about different scenarios in this framework, right? So the first example that we've heard frequently, right, is kind of you see artificial intelligence and you see automation and you see technology come onto the scene, and you might step back and say, you know what, I don't know how I feel about this, because it feels like this thing is here to do the job that I'm hired to do, right? So it's very possible that we're going to implement some software or some technology, and then all of a sudden everything that I've done, everything I've been hired to do, I don't have to do anymore, and that might make me feel uncomfortable, right? So how do we challenge that line of dominant thinking? Ljuba, I'll turn it over to you first. What are your thoughts when you hear a talent acquisition professional or practitioner kind of voice those concerns?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. I think when you look at recruiting, and I've been in this space for almost 20 years at this point, and when I first started, the monsters of the world, the career builders of the world were just sort of popping up and showing up, and even if you look at it from a different context, if you think about banking and the banking industry, back in the, let's call it the early 80s to mid 80s, there was this new technology that was coming out, and you were going to take your plastic card and you were going to fire it into a machine, and it was going to fire cash out to you, and that was going to revolutionize and change the banking world. And it has. It's made it easy to access your money. We've seen it advance to web banking and mobile banking. But what it hasn't done is it hasn't fully replaced the brick and mortar experience at a bank, right? You can still go in, you can still talk to people. It's just made that experience much more consultative, which I think is exactly what you're seeing from a talent acquisition perspective. As we were talking about before we got on the stream, we do work within human resources. There will always be a human component to what it is that we ultimately do. The biggest decisions that you make in life are potentially buying a house, getting married, potentially having children, and then changing your job and your career. I don't know that people do that ever so lightly, where they're just going to allow and have technology to do it. What I think technology is doing for us, though, is it's making us much more efficient. It is giving us time back into the work that we do, and it is taking some of those tasks that we normally used to do. Call it scheduling interviews, if you will, or assessing candidates sort of through first rounds, and allowing us to take that time pass it over to the machine and let the machine do it, while at the same time allowing us to build stronger relationships, whether it's with our hiring managers or with our candidates.
Yeah, and Christine, I heard a little bit of lateral thinking, in Ljuba's response. Like, what are your thoughts? Because the idea that this is how we've always done it before, like, is textbook dominant thinking, right? So when we think about letting technology in, another good example too, I gave a webinar on automated scheduling, right? And we showed kind of the power of automated scheduling, and we introduced conversational AI, which makes it feel, a little bit more human. And in doing that, we had a bunch of comments saying, "Oh, this is great," but we did have one attendee comment and say, "Manual scheduling is perfect." Like, I've been doing this for 25 years, and to be able to get on the phone, he didn't say email, he said get on the phone, which also felt a little like super traditional. I can't remember the last time I got on the phone. But like he said, get on the phone and contact candidates and contact hiring managers and manually kind of set this up. To me, that felt like textbook dominant thinking, and there's nothing invalid about what that individual felt, and obviously, and it has worked and it will continue to work. But Christine, how would you suggest walking through taking that from the dominant thinking to the lateral thinking?
That's a great question and a really good example too. I didn't have a chance to add it to the comments earlier, but when you asked in the beginning about books that we've been reading, the one that I have most recently had next to me at night when I'm sort of decompressing for the day is Brene Brown's latest book, Atlas of the Heart, which is all about mapping connection and diving into like 87 of the most salient and common emotions in our world as humans, and giving language to feelings, which is really hard to do. And so when I think about moving from dominant to lateral thinking in the example you provided, I think about the emotions that underlie that sentiment, right? Because as much as we like to think we're logical, rational beings because we're humans, we're actually not. We're predictably unpredictable, and we are sort of guided by emotions. Our thoughts are actually the ways we express the things we're feeling. And so when we say scheduling works, manual scheduling works, it's true. It does work, right? And we're not saying it doesn't work. But when we think about lateral thinking and we question a bit differently, we start to say, but what if you had that time back to do something else, right? What would you like to be doing, right? Let's not tell you you're wrong, right? Because if I say you're wrong and it doesn't work or it's not as efficient, I'm feeding into the wrong emotional state. To get people to move into a lateral thinking mindset, you want them to have positive feelings and positive sentiments around it. And so it's okay to validate, yes, manual scheduling does work, but we could do something different with that time if we didn't have to do it. And what would you want to do? What could we do that would be more impactful for candidates? What could we be doing with that extra 2 hours or 4 hours in our week that could really revolutionize, our ability to find the right talent or nurture them more meaningfully and connect with them more authentically? And that gets people's minds in a state that allows for that kind of novel thinking to really bubble to the surface.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. It's actually quite interesting the point that Christine's making, because when I started, it was all about manual scheduling. Like that, it was just the way that it was done, and it also allowed you to engage with that candidate repeatedly through the process. And so you were constantly talking to them. You were constantly understanding where they were, how they were thinking, and incrementally, the time that the time that you ultimately do save through doing something that is not manual, that is automated, directly speaks to being able to do other things. To Christine's point, nurturing those relationships with candidates that you are engaged with and talking to, going out and spending more time looking for unconventional ways to find candidates. And so I think the point is really important, that it's not that it's wrong to do it or that it doesn't work or that it's inefficient, but what can you do with the time that you actually save, and how much more value does that bring, not only to you and your career and what you do, but to your organization, to the people that you talk to.
Shout out to Paul in the comments. Last thing I want to do is manual scheduling. So Paul knows what's up. But I think one point that was made, and I'll reiterate it too, is that dominant thinking is not wrong. Like I think that's one thing that I think we want to drive home, is that there's no right or wrong here, right? It's not about the right way to do something. It's about exploring what's possible, right? And exploring other ways. And I think, one of the concepts that we talk about a lot here at Phenom is this concept of the evolved recruiter. And Ljuba, I'm going to save some of that because we're going to get into that. We're going to get deeper into that next week when you're in the office, but this idea of the bank teller, right? The evolved bank teller, where the bank teller has previously, it was very transactional, right? It was very much a transactional relationship. But then it has transformed into something that's more consultative. And a lot of that was predicated by technology, being introduced and giving time back in the day. Fewer manual transactions meant that the time back could be spent evolving into this new role. And I think we're starting to see the recruiter and sourcers and even talent acquisition leaders be in a position where they can do this too. The other thing that we talked about too, Christine, earlier this week, is we were talking about video assessments, right? Because video assessments is another thing that is really kind of introducing a new normal, right? A new way of doing something that has traditionally been face-to-face, that has traditionally been manual. I know a lot of recruiters are on the fence about how they feel about it. A lot of candidates are on the fence about how they feel about it. A lot of candidates have been, we see on Reddit, like, I don't like this, and I think that's okay, like, to be introduced to something new and have the initial reaction be, I'm not so sure about this yet. Now there are other reasons why they don't like it: poor experience, getting ghosted, things like that. But when we think about video assessments, if the initial dominant thinking is, this doesn't feel right. What are some thoughts? I'll turn it over to Ljuba, because I know you've had experience with video assessments. What's the lateral thought there? How can we take it into a different direction?
Yeah, and I think when you look at it from dominant versus lateral, in that lateral perspective, it gives you the opportunity to do it in your own pace, at your own time, to understand how you are going to present, and ultimately put your best self forward through a medium that is you've got control over, right? And that experience, I think, is crucial and very important. On the flip side of it, for hiring managers who tend to who've always wanted to come across and said, I want to make sure that I meet this person in person, at this sort of stage, it's the same sort of conversation, right? You get a snapshot of who the individual is. You get to spend time looking at that snapshot at a point in time that's convenient for you, and so you're not taking away from your day-to-day activities that you're responsible for, to just look at or to focus on recruiting. And so I think the lateral thought on that is that again, it's time. We talk about time quite a bit, and it ultimately allows you to do things at your own pace at a particular point in time, while still getting the return that you ultimately need.
Yeah, Christine, I was going to turn it over to you, Christine, because I know you've been the hiring manager, right?
Yeah.
You've been on that side of things, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, and I want to point out what I hear from Ljuba in his response is us asking the question, what is the value we may not be considering, right? So we say that video assessments aren't as good as face-to-face or on the phone with a recruiter, or they're not going to like them, or the experience is going to be bad. We go to that line of thinking. But when we flip it to say, well, what could be the benefits? What could be different? What value is this going to bring us? That's where you get those answers that expand it to more novel spaces. And as a hiring manager, what I appreciate about video assessments is that it reduces the whisper down the lane effect of screening a candidate, right? So I tell a recruiter that these are the things I'm interested in. They ask the questions, the candidate tells them, they send me a note in writing. I have to read through their notes and understand what they got out of this conversation that I wasn't part of. And now I'm not entirely clear all the time if that candidate is or is not someone that I want to meet with. So then I end up saying, yes, put them on a phone call with me, and now I'm doing it anyway. So,
right,
when you think about that, there's this sort of lost context and lost value in the narrative of that candidate. And sometimes we make them have to repeat things a second time just because we didn't fully grasp the context the first time. Those video assessments give us a shared experience. We, both the recruiter and the hiring manager, can now look at that video assessment and see the same answer, the same body language, the same tone of voice, and come together and make a shared sort of assessment of that candidate in a way that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, and doesn't require you to coordinate schedules across all three people.
Right.
And so there's value all around in that. And when you think about it that way, it really does expand the possibilities of what we can do in the TA space.
It's totally the outside of the tic-tac-toe board, right? When you think about it. So I think that's super helpful to kind of put it through that lens. Ljuba, you mentioned something that was really powerful, which is it's all about time, right? And I think one of the common tropes about business is that your business's greatest asset is your people, right? But when you think about it, your business's greatest asset is probably the time your people have to do the things that they need to do in the best way that they can do it, right? And when we're able to really invest into getting them the time, right, to explore and to innovate and to do things differently and think differently, and question context, right? Like that is where the true magic happens. So Christine, I know you have a couple exercises, a couple tips on how talent acquisition teams can start to kind of practice this, day to day. So do you want to share, just one or two ideas that could be leveraged?
Yeah, we actually did a few of these activities in that training that you referenced that we did here at Phenom, because if you ever take a training here at Phenom from our group, you know that you're going to participate. We're not just going to speak at you. And one of them, related to sort of the dominant lateral, is to pick a scenario similar to what we've been doing here. But it could be in a team meeting, it could be in a one-on-one conversation, and have the group of people or the individual just start with all the dominant thoughts. Right, they're going to come easy. Right, they're just right on the tip of our tongue. We know all the things that we're thinking, and then take each one and reframe it. Right, ask a what if question, ask a why question, challenge those assumptions, go into that triple loop learning, and use it to kind of springboard people. And you can even do it, you can make it part of your culture and day-to-day habit just by calling people out as you hear it, right? You hear someone say something that is an example of dominant thinking. You can challenge them on the spot to flip it, reframe it as a lateral question, and make that just standard practice. And you can do the same thing with questioning unconventionally. You can, ask a question like, if we had 4 hours back in our week, every week, what could we do with that time? What would we do differently with that time? What would this process look like if it was easier, right? What would it look like if it was easier to coordinate schedules for interviews? Or what would it look like if it was easier to find talent for hard to fill roles? Let's put all the restrictions aside. And I actually say this when I coach in my one-on-ones. Whenever I ask someone to brainstorm, I say, your brain is going to immediately put boundaries on your thinking. You're going to start to think about all the limitations and all the restrictions and all the things that are going to get in the way. And I'm not saying to ignore them. I'm just saying to put them over here for a minute. Don't think about them right now. Imagine this perfect, ideal world. Think first in that space, and then let's layer on some of those restrictions and understand if we can work around them, if we can think differently about them, if they really are blockers. But you have to intentionally pull them aside in order to get to that space where you can question at that level.
Yeah, no, that is super helpful. I want to hear from everybody in the audience. So if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, you're watching live, shout out in the comments if there is something that you've been grappling with, right? An activity or some line of dominant thinking, now that you're familiar with kind of the term and kind of the methodology there, is there something that you've been grappling with that you think would benefit from this type of exercise? We don't have to go through it now, of course, in the interest of time, but I'd just love to know kind of what are some of the challenges that you've been experiencing. Feel free to shout out in the chat, and I'll share an example as a marketer. I've been questioning our webinars, that we do here at Phenom. We do very traditional webinars, right? And why? Because that's what webinars are, and we've always done them. And people sign up for them and they attend and they say that they're good. And that's great. It's doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. So it's not wrong, right? But starting to think about the context of why we do webinars and how we do webinars, and should we even think about them as webinars, or should they be something completely different? Like, that opens up opportunities for us to innovate again and just change the way that we think. Ljuba, I'll put you on the spot.
Sure.
Is there anything, again, and we can explore this next week while you're in the office, but like, is there anything, that your team is thinking about in terms of, let's change the way that we approach this, from a talent acquisition perspective?
Yeah, and it's, it comes down to how do we engage? How do we engage with candidates? Where do we engage with candidates? What do we have at our disposal today that we can use to engage with candidates, and can we do it differently? Are there, traditionally it's post the job, look at people who are applying, go out to certain job boards and start scraping those. But are there other ways for us to ultimately do it? Can we leverage our platform in a different way, in a much more effective and efficient way? And so we're constantly looking at it. For me, at least in my mind, there's nothing that we can't look at and explore to see if there's a better way to do it, for sure. And if it helps us get the right talent at the right time, then why not? Let's go after it.
Yeah, no, totally. We have one last kind of concept here, one last pillar from Christine's training as we were coming up on time, and we'll start to wrap things up. But this concept, I think, is super helpful for leaders, right? Leaders, managers, folks who are trying to help guide teams in this direction. So I will pull this back up. And of course, we're opening with another quote. Love this one, right? And again, Christine, you're showing your P here. We are a Peloton house here too, so I know it. Your comfort zone is your own worst enemy. I love it. So why don't you talk us through kind of chasing the unfamiliar and how this is an important pillar of moving towards this mindset shift?
Yeah, it goes back to that comment I made about being comfortably uncomfortable. When you are exploring something new, when you are thinking differently, when you're challenging your assumptions, there is this, what you're really trying to do is move into the learning zone that you see there. You're trying to explore, expand, evolve. But in order to get there, you go through this little fear zone, right? That, like, stepping into the unfamiliar, there are feelings that are going to come up because it's uncomfortable, because it's new. And those things will cause us to sort of retreat back into the comfort zone unless we can find our way through them. And that's where managers and leaders really come into play. That's where coaching becomes really important. It's why I really enjoy the book Atlas of the Heart, because that fear zone, fear is an emotion. It's a very intense emotion for a lot of people, but it's a complex emotion. There's so many things that underlie why you might have fear. It could be apprehension. It could be anxiety. It could just be a lack of knowledge. It could be a lack of confidence. Getting to the point where you can have your employees or even yourself be able to name it, to give sort of context to that fear, to say it out loud and have words for it, helps us move past it. Because if we can't say it, if we don't have words or language to describe what we're feeling, it's really hard to process it. It's really hard to go through that and then get to the other side. And so for managers, and I do this myself, I'm always looking at and questioning what I'm seeing. If an employee is coming with a lot of excuses, it's so easy, dominant thinking, right? They're not ready for this. They're not strong enough as a performer. They're not a good fit for this company. But what if we say, what else might be causing their excuses? Maybe there's fear under there. What is different? What might be unfamiliar here? How can I help them articulate this better? That's me as a leader using a different line of thinking to help someone move through the fear zone into the learning zone, which ultimately can get them to that point of personal and professional growth.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, because Christine, you've never been my manager, but we've worked on a couple of projects together. And I feel like we were working on a project once, and I said something that was very dominant thinking oriented. And I remember your response was something along the lines of like, okay, but what would you do if there weren't any boundaries, right? Or what would you do?
That sounds like me.
yeah. You're like, okay, like that. Sure, Tom, I understand. But like, what would you do, or how would you approach this? If there weren't any limitations, right? Or there weren't the specific limitation that I was talking about, right? And I remember thinking like, wow, Christine's probably an awesome person to work for. So Christine, I don't know if you're hiring, but Phenom Careers, head on over and see what we have available, because we've got some great leadership here. But so I love it, and I think like that concept. And Patry, who's in the chat, she shared something in our marketing Slack group that was, the magic happens outside of the comfort zone. It's like, here's the comfort zone, and here's where the magic happens, and it was so far outside of it. And it's just a great reminder, that it's not fun. Sometimes it's not fun, but eventually you get to a point where it's really fun. Like it's that crossing the threshold that isn't comfortable or fun, but once you get there, it is just awesome, right? So even last week, right? So last week, I'm typically doing Talent Experience Live in my little dungeon here back in my basement, and I have my 3 monitors in front of me with notes, and I'm an introvert, so I'm standing behind, and this is my comfort zone, right? And last week I had to do face-to-face with Jess Elmquist, which was an awesome episode, right? And it was so much fun, but I was jittery, and it was hard, but I think it's a good metaphor for sometimes you just have to take the leap and do things differently. So we covered so much ground. I'll turn it over to Ljuba first. If you have any final thoughts, anything you want to kind of end today's episode on, and of course, don't give us too much gold, because you're going to be back next week, and we want to save some of that for the next episode.
Sure. And I, again, appreciate the opportunity to join the two of you today. This is a great topic. I think it's the art of the possible, right? What is possible, and I think that the limitations, and the quotes have all said it. The limitations are the ones that we put upon ourselves versus the ones that we are willing to work towards and push through. And so, if we start from the premise of, Christine, I think your premise is, but if the boundaries weren't there, what could you possibly do? If we start from that perspective, I think that we, very quickly and very rapidly will change the way the world works. And so I love it. I love that whole idea. I love that whole concept. And certainly I've had the same experiences, Tom, that you've had with Christine around, pushing that thinking away from dominant to the other side. So.
Awesome. And Christine, I want to make sure you have an opportunity. Any final thoughts, any words of wisdom? I know this is your area of focus, right? So you could probably go for another couple hours if we gave you the floor, but
I probably could.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
No, I mean, Ljuba just said it best. I describe it as abundance thinking, right?
Yeah.
Just having that mind. It's all about your mindset. We are our own worst limit. We limit ourselves the worst, right? It's putting yourself in the right mindset. It's surrounding yourself with people who will tease that out of you, and supporting one another. You don't have to cross that threshold alone. So seek out others and engage in that thinking together. And it's a world of possibility out there.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't have to do it alone. There's so much out there that you can explore, around these topics. Earlier, Maggie mentioned in the comments a podcast interview with Hugh Jackman on the Tim Ferriss show. And Tim Ferriss has so much.
Tim Ferriss
here. Yeah, like when you talk about, I think one of the first opportunities that I've heard about abundance thinking as a concept was through Tim Ferriss or one of his pieces of content. And you had mentioned in your training, we didn't talk about it today, but Tools of the Titans, which is a massive book. Like, it is probably one of the thickest books on my bookshelf, right? But it's just full of different entrepreneurs and different critical thinkers who have really embraced, this idea that you can buck the conventional. We also heard from Patry in the chat saying, HBO Max picked up an Atlas of the Heart series. So if you're a Brene Brown fan and you haven't checked out the book, check it out. And there's a series coming up, which is awesome. And Paul, obviously Paul, who we know does not appreciate manual scheduling. He does appreciate stepping outside of the comfort zone. So there's no growth in the comfort zone and no comfort in the growth zone. I love it. Yeah, Paul, thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. This has been an awesome episode. So thank you both for joining and kind of sharing your brains with us. Always an abundance of knowledge and wisdom that you guys have to share. I appreciate working with you guys every single day. Next week, as I mentioned, we have Ljuba, who will be joining us in person. Ambler, you're coming to us from Canada, up north. You're going to be swinging down to Pennsylvania. So we're excited to see you. Of course, I want to give a quick shout out to everybody who joined in the chat. We had Paul, Patry, Kainat, welcome. Amy, who has been, with us for a couple episodes. Amy, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Sarah, Maggie, really appreciate it. Everybody who's watching on the replay, appreciate your time and attention. Always a pleasure. Christine, Ljuba, I will catch both of you guys soon, of course, but thanks again for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Another episode in the books, Talent Experience Live. Join us every Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern. As I mentioned, we do this because we love spending time with you, bringing some of these conversations with you, to you, being able to engage with you in the chat. It is an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much. Again, as I mentioned, Ljuba and I will be in studio. We'll be in the Phenom office. And it's just great opportunity for us to connect face to face. Sarah, great episode. Looking forward to next week. Sarah, would love to see you there. Paul, thanks again for joining. Would love to see you next week as well too. So be sure to like us on LinkedIn and do all that stuff, do all that crazy social stuff, so that you get notified, never miss a beat. And we'll look forward to spending some more time with you next week on Talent Experience Live. Take care.